Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House. During question period, there are certain rules of parliamentary practice which must be adhered to. And so it is that when points of order or points of privilege are raised, as there were yesterday, these must be dealt with at the end of question period so that the questions can be carried on in question period. However, there are rules of parliamentary practice that have been developed over the last 600 years. In the Alberta Legislature, we have a book called Standing Orders, and it has 116 main sections, which the Speaker must be familiar with. Then we also appeal to the rules and procedures of our Federal House of Commons, and that's a book called Beauchesne, which has 894 sections. And if all that doesn't cover the parliamentary practice, then we appeal to a book which gives the parliamentary practice at Westminster, and that book has something like 1,100 pages. And that's why the Speaker needs to have a clerk assistant, and one parliamentary counsel to help interpret it, the rules of the game.
And wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave today to introduce a bill being an act to provide equal pay for work of equal value.
The honourable member for Edmonton Avonmore has moved first reading of Bill 229, an act to provide for equal pay for work of equal value. All members wishing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 229, an act to provide for equal pay for work of equal value, introduced by Honourable Member Ms. Lang, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to report table the annual report of Lethbridge Community College.
Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
Speaker, I beg leave to table the annual report of Consumer and Corporate Affairs Department for the years 1986-1987.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Education, followed by the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased today to introduce 15 students who are taking courses at the Grant MacEwan College in the Jasper Place campus. The students are taking a course entitled Understanding Government, and I want to assure them all that we in the Legislative Assembly are constantly increasing our understanding of government all the while, so I want to assure them they're not alone. They are accompanied by their teacher, a former alderman from our fine city of Edmonton, Mr. Percy Wickman, and I would ask them all to receive the warm welcome of this assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to have two very special introductions to do. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce someone who is well known to this Assembly, and particularly in Calgary, as a very tireless worker on behalf of her constituents and Calgarians in general. Mr. Speaker, this lady is chairman of the Community Services Committee for the City of Calgary and is, of course, Alderman Barb Scott. Barb, would you stand and receive the recognition of the House? Also, Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce the first group of students from the Three Hills constituency. They are 33 students from a grade 9 class at Prairie Junior High School. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Jake Paitko has tirelessly come forward each year with his group of students to impress upon them the functions of government as well as to let them have a little enjoyment here in the city of Edmonton. And I understand they're going to be going to the West Edmonton Mall, which is one place the member hasn't been to. I'd like them to rise along with Mr. Pageco and Mrs. Donna Brown to receive the warm welcome of the House.
St. Albert, called by Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure for me today to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Legislative Assembly a group of 38 grade 6 students from the School of Wild Rose located in the beautiful city of St. Albert. They're seated in the public gallery and they're accompanied by Miss Juliette Rush, Ms. Patricia Leminski, and Mr. Tony Swery. I'd ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 22 grade 6 students from the St. Lucie School in the constituency of Calder. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Dale Dvorak, and they are seated in the public gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of meeting 17 lively students this afternoon from the Bellevue Elementary School located in the riding of Edmonton Highlands. They're grade 5 and 6 students, Mr. Speaker, accompanied today by their teacher, Mr. Alan Asachi, and mums, Mrs. Drouar and Mrs. Leclerc. We had a grand time downstairs in my office and in the rotunda, and I know we're going to have a grand time in the House today. I ask all members to join me in asking them to rise and welcoming them.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, apparently setting up the code investigation prevents the opposition from questioning the Premier about the government's bungling of the principal affair. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing to say that this couldn't happen again in the future, especially with this government. My question, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier then clarify what action the government has taken subsequent to the code investigation to clean up the regulatory system in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, those responsibilities fall with the provincial treasurer.
Speaker, as I have indicated in the House last fall, it is our intention to bring forward several pieces of legislation which I think will deal with a variety of the problems which are found not just in Alberta regulations and legislation, but in a review of the legislation across Canada. Significant among those two pieces of legislation, Mr. Speaker, depending on the time before us, would be, first of all, the credit union legislation, an act which has not been reviewed or changed since 1938. And it is also my intention, Mr. Speaker, if the cadence of the House and the time of the House permits, to deal with the introduction of trust company legislation.
Mr. Speaker, specifically then, to either the Premier or the Treasurer, I want to know specifically what changes the government is going to make sure that never, ever again will friends of the government be allowed to sell investment contracts which are not worth what people pay for them.
Mr. Speaker, I would certainly like to give that commitment, but of course I think, perhaps beyond the range of the government and certainly beyond the range of most people to give that kind of a never, never commitment. It is sincerely our hope that the kinds of strengthening and new kinds of legislation which I referred to would deal with the fundamental problems. It still leaves us the question of dealing with the contract legislation. I think it's fair to say that that is troublesome to us as well. Other provinces have attempted to deal with that legislation by a variety of means. I think you'll see, Mr. Speaker, that the BC government will make some adjustments in its spring session. I think it would be a touch preemptive if we were to deal with the contract legislation before the code inquiry is completed. Nonetheless, a full review is underway. I think the Premier indicated that when we announced the code inquiry that the government was directing its attention to the regulatory side, and we are carrying out that responsibility.
Well, specifically, Mr. Speaker, if I may say so, we didn't have to wait for the code inquiry. Almost everybody in Alberta knows something's wrong, so clearly at this point the government's doing nothing. My question then to the Treasurer, what action has the Treasurer taken to prevent in the future cross-political motives on the part of cabinet ministers interfering with the regulatory process in a way which may harm the public?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that is certainly an objectionable statement for the member to make. There's very little evidence. In fact, there's no evidence that that is the case. But if there is anything that the government is at fault with respect to the principal group, if that's the point of reference that the member makes, obviously Mr. Code will take that under his consideration. But I think it is, in fact, tragic and perhaps slightly out of order for the member to suggest before Mr. Code has had an opportunity to come down to a conclusion, to make any kind of a conclusion himself.
Mr. Speaker, what's objectionable is a lot of innocent people lost their savings in a lot of cases in the past. That's objectionable. My question to the Treasurer, rather than him being defensive about it, in the past we've been told that the government was told to clean up their regulatory processes in the past. Now in the future, my question is to the Treasurer, does the Treasurer not worry that if something isn't done, if we're going to sit and wait and wait and wait, that we are going to lose our regulatory industry, our Alberta financial base, and we're talking about diversification. What are they doing about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think, first of all, on a comparison basis, and I will skip over any allusions that he made with respect to the efficacy of this government, but with respect to the process itself, Mr. Speaker, other provinces, in fact, have looked to Alberta as the guide. Now, I know we have gone through the failure of 3 financial institutions. Those have been fully investigated. We're doing everything we can to learn from those failures, Mr. Speaker. It's not a question of being defensive. It's a question of trying to work with what the regulators have suggested, deal with the inquiry, and to accept advice from all those who are unfortunately touched by this sad experience we've gone through. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, it should be known that we do have significant financial strength in this province. Institutions which are unique to the province of Alberta have been admired by others, including the Treasury branch, which this year is celebrating its 50th year. I mentioned already the strengthening of the credit union, which provides financial services to over 500,000 Albertans. They know the importance of that institution, and they know that this province came to their assistance to make it work. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the Northwest...
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's also to the provincial treasurer. Mr. Speaker, there are a beleaguered group of investors who have been completely forgotten by this government with Battleford Mortgage. Will the treasurer put up just a small amount of the money, the legal fees, compared to what he's already done for the Code enterprise to help these investors, all good Albertans that put their money in under their what they thought was a safe government supervised corporation? Will the treasurer put up the money to help their legal costs?
Mr. Speaker, that action has already been before the, I believe, a higher court in Saskatchewan, which one I'm not too sure, but it has been in Saskatchewan, and that court, in fact, indicated that there was no wrongdoing on behalf of the regulators there. It's not our responsibility, Mr. Speaker, to provide assistance to every company that goes bankrupt. It's unfortunate, but our unique contribution with respect to principle is just that.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my second question, designate to the member from Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, subsequent to yesterday's exchange with the Premier, I happen to recall being in airports and filling out chits for the airlines when I'm flying economy class, whereby I can volunteer to give up my seat if necessary, and they'll give me a bonus if I do that so that somebody in emergency can hop on my seat. I wonder if the Premier considered trying that route, or if his office tried that route when he needed to come home on Easter weekend, if his office asked any airlines to access that sort of bonus replacement system.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is now asking questions about my private personal life, and I have no intent of answering it.
Mr. Speaker, the minister said in the House yesterday his office was instructed to inquire as to whether or not there were seats available. Mr. Speaker, does the Premier now not acknowledge that that an average Albertan wouldn't have access to the kind of flight that he acquired, that he requested and acquired? Does he not acknowledge that this is some special treatment?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if this is in some way related to my responsibilities as Premier, but I might say this. The government at times has provided flights for Albertans when they need help. I think it's a characteristic of Albertans when somebody needs help on an emergency basis, we try to help one another.
Right. With a little help from our friends. $10,000.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't the question. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier would like to answer at least one of the series of questions. Does he not understand that he's in a position sort of like Caesar's wife? He doesn't just have to be above reproach, he has to be seen to be above reproach.
Right on.
Next question.
To the Premier who doesn't answer questions anymore, will inappropriate...
Afraid to comment about lack of answers being given in Beauchesne?
Enough. The record will show it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier hasn't found a way to pay NOVA, and I'm sure he can, but if he hasn't found a way in the last 24 hours, will he at least do the honorable thing and make a donation, say, to the food bank in Edmonton of the approximate equivalent value of that flight?
Mr. Speaker, I consider that suggestion absolute foolishness.
Really? Member for Red Deer North.
Can the Premier tell us, in light of the fact that an airplane flight helping a Premier in distress seems to be a shocking outrage to the opposition, can he give direction to a private member as myself whether it would be permissible for me to take, for instance, an automobile ride with a private businessman from Red Deer to Edmonton, or even a ride in a private Cessna from Red Deer to Edmonton?
Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
No, it's not the main question, Mr. Speaker. It's a supplementary. I had expected he was going to answer the Red Deer Northman. The question is, in view of the rhubarb that you've sort of created or precipitated, Mr. Premier, would you not to go back to the drawing board or have somebody in those leprechauns you have on the front bench there go back to the drawing board and prepare a set of regulations that would govern taking free transportation, whether it's in a car or a wheelbarrow or in the Nova plane?
Mr. Speaker, I would never try and come up with regulations that would prevent an Albertan from helping another Albertan. I think that's a foolish suggestion from the honourable member and an indication of trying to play cheap political games with this issue.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
Thank you. I don't usually get a chance to get back at the Premier. He always says a cheap shot till my last question, but this time I will direct my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, as you know, that this government last year stopped Medicare funding any doctor's billings for patient visits, which were solely for obtaining birth control information or first birth control counseling. However, at last weekend's conference, was reported by Dr. Ann Reid, very closely associated to the minister's seatmate there, that Mr. Moore will now, in fact, let doctors bill for Medicare when they'll not only bill for it, they get paid. Will the patient, the question, Mr. Speaker, is when a patient goes to a doctor solely for birth control counseling, that is separate from annual checkup or other regular visit, will the doctor be allowed to bill health care and be paid?
Mr. Speaker, I've indicated in numerous occasions in the legislature that there are a number of other opportunities for doctors to be able to bill a health care insurance plan for contraceptive counseling. The fee schedule, Mr. Speaker, is quite a detailed one, which most medical practitioners are well aware of. And I could go into it at some length, but perhaps it would just suffice to say that there is one general fee schedule code that's called an A1. That's for a general visit to a doctor that can be billed not more than once every 6 months. That can be billed for any purpose whatsoever, including contraceptive counseling. There is also an A2 fee schedule. It's for a first visit where a complete workup of the patient's health isn't required at a lower amount, and that can be billed as well for such things as contraceptive counseling. In addition to that, there's an opportunity at any time during the course of, I believe it's 10 visits that we pay for during the course of a pregnancy, where contraceptive counseling can be provided. I could go on, Mr. Speaker, to...
I'm sure you get a chance in supplementaries, please.
Speaker, he is cavilling and dunging around. The question very simple. The question is very, very simple. The doctors don't want to play games, just as Dr. Ann Reed said, quite rightfully. They do not want to play games. Yes or no? Can the doctors bill Medicare for contraceptive counseling? That's that simple.
Well, the honourable member always has had a lot of difficulty understanding, and perhaps if he'd listen again closely. There was at one time a specific fee schedule for contraceptive counseling in the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan that didn't exist in any other plan in Canada. That was in addition to the opportunities to bill for that kind of service under the A1 or the A2 fee schedule, or when during the course of visits during the course of a pregnancy. We took that out because very simply there were some medical practitioners, who were using the contraceptive counseling fee schedule code at the same time or the following day or week from when they were using the A1 fee code for a general office visit. And in our view, it was a duplication of payments for something that should have been provided under the other schedule. Now, I'm sorry that Mr. Speaker, that the medical fee schedule is complicated enough that the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party wouldn't understand it, but the facts are that there are still many opportunities for individuals to get contraceptive counseling information and for medical doctors to provide it.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader is not the only one confused. I had a number of calls this morning from medical doctors that can't figure it out either. Can we go a step further, Mr. Minister? Will the Medicare pay for the bills submitted by doctors that give counseling on sterilization, IUD insertions and vasectomies, which is different from birth control? Will they pay for that counseling?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, some of the medical doctors will be in trouble too if they've been calling the Honourable Leader for their information. But leaving that aside, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member could ask them to call the Healthcare Insurance Plan. Leaving that aside, a visit to a doctor's office for general illness is not something that the doctor necessarily has to record on the billing schedule when they bill the Healthcare Insurance Plan. We don't say to the medical profession, tell us the exact reason that everybody come in your door. It's an honor system, if you like, that they bill an appropriate fee schedule for the kind of work they do, and it relates to the time and the nature of the visit and that sort of thing. So there's lots of opportunities for doctors to bill for receiving or giving advice to patients about any number of things that might relate to their health. And that can be done under what's called the A1 fee schedule or the A2, or for that matter an A4, which is another category.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister is right. It is an honor system, and the honourable people don't want to go through the manipulations that he asked them to. Would the Minister then consider reimbursing, since he has reinstituted vasectomies, sterilizations, etc., back into the medical, quite properly back into the medical plan? Will he consider reimbursing those people that have used or paid out of their own pocket since last July, since they were taken out of the plan? Now they're back in. Will he reimburse those people that have paid out of their own pockets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not up to me to simply decide whether or not I'm going to reimburse them. The matter was one of where
Cabinet having made a decision originally that we would take those items out of the plan, and then having made a decision last week that we would put them back in. Part of that decision included a decision that we would not make retroactive payments. After all, we were trying to balance our budget last year, and if we are now to make some changes and make them all retroactive, we'll have some difficulty with the provincial treasurer.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, does he not recognize that many people may contemplate becoming sexually active 6 weeks, say, after their annual exam, that they feel perfectly healthy, and that they should then have a right to go to the doctor for the specific matter of contraceptive counseling, and then follow up if they're getting the pill or whatever to see if in fact it's working?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I realize that, and they can.
To Calgary Northwest.
Honourable Minister's answer. There is also available, not through the doctor system in this province, but through the health unit system, an expanded availability of clinical services for birth control counselling. We announced at the same time last week that in addition to Calgary's and Edmonton's clinics for birth control counselling, we would be expanding funding and providing that same service through funding of the health units in Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Fort McMurray.
Calgary Northwest.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. In this province, when an individual has a medical problem, whether that be a headache, a concern about contraception, or sterilization, they're entitled to go and see their doctor and ask for advice, and that has always been covered. The problem is the confusion of the opposition and the media, and I would ask the minister...
With due respect, Honourable Member, I can let a preamble go only so long. Let's hear the question, please.
Could I ask the minister then to address the first question, is contraceptive counseling covered in this province? Yes or no?
That's order, please. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated to the honourable leader of the Liberal Party, the answer to the question isn't quite that simple. There are there are plenty. Oh, sorry.
Keep it down. Member for Little Bow, main question, followed by Stettler, Vegreville, Calgary, Buffalo, Edmonton Avonmore, Redwater Andrew, Edmonton Calder, Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question, first of all, and the last one, to the Minister of Health. I've had representation indicating that persons feel that eye examinations by optometrists may have a greater priority than birth control information. Could the Minister indicate in their examination of priorities in this matter the placement of optometrists or optometric eye exams?
Honourable Member, that's not contraceptive counselling, which was the line of question. Now I recognize the member for main question.
That was close. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the... Sorry, I couldn't see that, right? That's correct. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. The grain farmers of Alberta and Western Canada are going to be faced with a shortfall on estimate at this time of some 25% in terms of income relative to their expenses for their 1988 crop. And my question to the Minister of Agriculture is whether the Minister has made intensive representation to the federal government to continue the Special Canadian Grains program so that some of this deficit can be picked up by that means as it was in 1987.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and it was just today that I had discussions with Unifarm and their leadership whereby we are developing a coordinated approach so that we can have the greatest impact on the federal government to ensure that there is an additional special grains program next year.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate when the meetings will be held with the federal government? Is it going to be in the next few weeks, or is the Minister going to wait until August before these meetings are held? Is there immediate urgency being applied to this issue?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and in view of the urgency, we had some meetings some weeks ago with the Minister responsible, Charlie Mayer, in our office here in Edmonton, whereby we did participate in discussions indicating to them the essential nature of having an additional special grains program.
Your supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate that the federal government is prepared to proceed with the continuation of that program for the crop year 1988? Or is there doubt in the Minister's mind and as well the federal government's mind at this time in terms of allocation of funding?
Mr. Speaker, in discussions with them, they left me with the impression, with their willingness to continue with their strong support to the agricultural sector, recognizing that the grains market are depressed. We have not a firm commitment from them, but they have left me with the impression of their willingness to develop another special grains program for 1988.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. The parallel program to the Special Canadian Grains program is the Western Grains Stabilization Program. Could the Minister indicate that whether that program will be changed for the crop year 1988 in terms of acting as an improved supplement to the net income of the farmers?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I'm more than happy to forward these specifics to the honourable member. When I did meet with Charlie Mayer, he indicated to us, and there is presently legislation before the Federal House, that there were going to be a number of substantial changes to it. As the honourable member is also aware, the federal government did pick up a significant portion of the deficit under the Western Grain Transportation Account.
Supplementary.
Recognizing that farmers aren't happy with this whole special Canadian grain system being tied to political decisions like an election in Saskatchewan or a pending federal election, I'm wondering what the Minister's position is on having target prices wrapped into the special Canadian grains program so that it would be triggered by low prices, not by a government's failing popularity.
Mr. Speaker, the Associate Minister has been working very hard on this to the extent that we have endorsed the recommendations of our Hail and Crop report whereby there would be an actual revenue insurance. We are working with the federal government. I should share with the honourable member too that the federal government has given us notice that they wish to change the proportional contributions under the Hail and Crop insurance. We are going to have in-depth discussions with them so that we can remove that stopgap provisions that presently exist and hopefully have a consistent program so that we don't have to do it on an ad hoc basis.
Member for Cypress Radcliffe, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. I wonder if in his discussions with the Federal Minister, the Minister could again urge the Federal Minister to remove the cap on the size of the farms on that special grains payout, and in addition, try to work out the problems related to the alfalfa industry of the inclusion and non-inclusion of some parts of it in the grains payout.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report to the honourable member that I have been working very closely with individuals involved in the alfalfa industry. And as the honourable member is also aware, the federal government did endorse the recommendations of the various farm groups that came together with their proposals. And we have had discussions with those farm groups as it relates to the cap. But again, Mr. Speaker, we respect very much the individual farm groups who have advocated a similar approach.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, final supplementary on this topic.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, in view of the questions pointing out the almost impossibility of getting aid to farmers on a commodity support basis, is this government going ahead and making studies on income support, just broad general income support for farmers rather than commodity support?
Mr. Speaker, that's why we have been so active with the threefold approach that our Premier has advocated in regard to the agricultural community as it relates to the safety net, the reduction of input costs, and greater emphasis on market and research development, so that we can ensure a strong, viable agricultural community in the province of Alberta.
The member for Stettler, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. And I I understand that an announcement was made recently that some 18 additional communities would receive some $900,000 in new funding under the Family and Community Support Services Program. My question to the Minister is, what criteria would he and his department use in choosing those communities to participate?
Mr. Speaker, a number of communities have made application to the government to participate in what I call the Family and Community Support Services family, and now some 90% of Albertans are covered by this program, which is a unique program. There isn't really one like it in the country, whereby the provincial government provides funding to a local community, and the people of that community, the volunteers and elected people, decide how that money is going to be spent on health and social issues that are of a priority in that community. It's not an Edmonton-dictated program, it's a community-directed program, and it's one I think that all Albertans can be very proud of.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister could provide us with some details on how these new funds will be used in the communities.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, that's the uniqueness of this program, is that where a city like Calgary may use its funds for the likes of the Meals on Wheels program, and I see our Alderman Barb Scott, ahead of our Community Services Committee from the City of Calgary here, and I have visited the Meals on Wheels program with Alderman Scott in Calgary. The people in the Wabasca-Desmarais area use it for the Let's Talk Society, because it's an issue that's of importance to the natives in Wabasca-Desmarais. And those are just two unique examples, Mr. Speaker. The people in that community have identified local issues that are of importance, social issues, health priorities, and said, this is the way we want to spend our money because these are items that are of concern to us, and we feel this is the best way to spend our money.
Mr. Speaker, through to the Minister, in view of the flexibility allowed in local initiatives, I wonder if the Minister could outline for the information of the House what regulations or guidelines are exercised in ensuring that those funds are well used.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in order for a community to receive funding of some 80 cents for every dollar that a community would spend, the province provides 80 cents and the community brings 20 cents to the table, there must be established a committee, a local committee made up of elected people and volunteers to determine how those dollars are to be spent. And the guidelines are pretty general, Mr. Speaker. They provide for all the flexibility that we can provide for those communities to identify local priorities and commit their resources and the province's resources to focusing on and attacking local problems or local issues of concern.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if there's a deadline for applications for FCSS funding and whether it is only municipal bodies or whether any body can apply.
Mr. Speaker, any locally elected group, including various Indian bands across the province, are eligible for FCSS funding. And as I mentioned, some 90% of Albertans will now be covered because of these 18 new communities within the family. And some 250 communities will actually be involved. So Mr. Speaker, the guidelines are quite clear. Eligibility is open to those communities that apply, and it's through the good fortune of increasing our FCSS program this year by 1.5% that we were enabled to bring all of those who've requested to be part of FCSS to bring them onto the program.
Edmonton Meadowlark, supplementary.
Could the Minister please inform the House, Mr. Speaker, whether he has considered expanding FCSS funding to include specific allocation for after-school care?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, that's the beauty of the program. locally elected or locally appointed groups, community service committees, social service committees, they identify the priorities. It isn't an Edmonton-directed program. It is local citizens making local decisions on local priorities. And if a community like Edmonton or Calgary or some 17 or 18 other communities across the province decide that out-of-school care is a priority, then they can allocate funds from using FCSS dollars. And I'm pleased that so many communities across the province have done just that, Mr. Speaker, with provincial government dollars.
Supplementary, Athabasca Lac-La-Biche.
Yes, to the Minister. Will this funding also help fund through FCSS home care for senior citizens in rural Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, that depends upon the local community. But in a number of cities and towns and villages across the province, FCSS homemaker services are purchased by the local health unit, such that FCSS is able to deliver those programs. Then in the case of the Athabasca Health Unit, then the health unit there is able to purchase those services. The home care program directly provides home nursing care, but invariably the homemaker services are purchased by the health unit and delivered through the local FCSS program.
Vegreville, Calgary, Buffalo, Edmonton, Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of the Environment, 3 abandoned dump sites near the hamlet of Duvernay have been found to contain a number of chemicals that pose a potential threat to the nearby North Saskatchewan River, as well as to the water supply for the people living in Duvernay. And I understand from material received from the Minister this morning that tests completed on wells in Duvernay show that the water is contaminated and generally unfit for consumption. And I'm wondering what assurance the Minister can give the people who live in the Duvernay district that they will have access to clean drinking water as soon as possible.
Mr. Speaker, today consultation is being provided to the residents of the hamlet of Duvernay and to municipal officials in the county of Two Hills and the town of Two Hills about test results we received yesterday afternoon as a result of tests that we took last week with respect to potable water in a series of wells in the Duvernay area. The water suggests that there are abnormal levels of chloride, sodium, and magnesium in the water, and as a result, we've declared the water unfit for human consumption. In addition to having provided that information to municipal authorities, we're also providing information indicating that should there be a requirement for special assistance to provide water to the residents of the area, that in essence we would be very pleased to cooperate with the local authority in that regard.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, if the tests on the water were done last week, I'm wondering when the sites were identified to the department. How long has it taken to get these results and make them available to people?
The sites in question, Mr. Speaker, were identified as a result of the Help Eliminate Landfill Pollution program that the government announced in July of 1986. And as we went through 1987, preliminary investigation took place on 3 dump sites in the area. And as a result of that preliminary investigation and the results of the water contamination that we received yesterday, we will begin an in-depth analysis by the end of this week through the offices of a private consultant. We'll be undertaking a grid assessment of the 3 landfill sites based on a 30-meter by 30-meter sectoral approach that will cover all 3 landfills.
Well, supplementary to the Minister, if the tests were done last week, I'm wondering when the sites were identified so that we can determine how long it's taken for the tests to be done. There are a number of other sites around the province that are of concern to people as well.
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was in July of 1986 that we announced the Help Eliminate Landfill Pollution program, and all honourable members will know that since that period of time, I've made periodic reports to the people of Alberta with respect to the assessment of the 650-odd sites that were looked at. And there were several numbers of them that we had set aside. As I indicated, the last public report I made was in January of 1988, that there were a small number of them that were going to be receiving special attention, and the 3 sites at Duvernay were those. The 3 sites at Duvernay go back to the chemical plant that was first created on site at Duvernay in 1953 and had a series of different owners of the sites until 1988.
Well, I hope that the minister does everything he can to speed up the process for other sites identification, but I'd like to ask the minister if the people in Duvernay can have his assurance that, that funding would be forthcoming from the department to help them secure an alternate and safe supply of water.
Mr. Speaker, it is in Alberta that the only industrial landfill assessment in the world has taken place. And it is unfortunate that the NDP once again is simply coming up with, I'm sorry, but it's too late and too slow kind of a response. There is no other jurisdiction anywhere that has created a program like the one that we've had that has led us to the determination of this particular site. I think all honourable members, including the honourable member from Vegreville, should be very proud of the initiative of this government with respect to this matter. And in addition to taking the initiative, we've also provided periodic reports to the people of Alberta. And I intend within the next number of weeks to provide an additional update with respect to the Help Eliminate Landfill Pollution Program. Mr. Speaker, there can be assurance with knowledge. And we are assembling the knowledge base in this province, which is unequaled anywhere else, I repeat, in the world.
Member Calgary-Buffalo, followed by Edmonton Avonmore at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In December 1984, the government set up a countermeasures committee to study, coordinate, and implement measures to rid the roads of drunk drivers. Since then, its recommendations, which have been kept secret in the usual tradition of open government, its recommendations have been ignored, and indeed government departments don't even know which cabinet minister is responsible. In the meantime, the government has done almost nothing to combat impaired driving except give us empty rhetoric. So to the Premier, I'm wondering whether the Premier or whoever over there is responsible, if anyone is, can tell us why the recommendations of the Countermeasures Committee have been ignored and funding has been denied to the committee.
Mr. Speaker, I'd take his question as notice and reply.
Supplement?
Well, it seems obvious that nobody over there is in charge, and we need...
Honourable member, just the question. Thank you.
We need safe roads 52 weeks of the year and not just at Christmas when check stops are in full force. I wonder whether the Solicitor General can tell Liz Howes why the government persists in refusing to directly fund more check stops when all studies show that this is the most effective way of combating impaired driving.
Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member perhaps avoided asking me, or the press avoided asking me yesterday as to who has the responsibility for this particular program. My department has responsibility for the impaired driving initiatives. This multi-department committee is under the auspices of ADAC. We have had a meeting approximately 8 months ago with the full committee, with the Attorney General, the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, the Minister in charge of ADAC, and myself. At that time, there was a proposal made by the committee that was gratefully received by the government, but entailed far, far too much money for the aims that they were attempting to achieve. We asked that they go back, restructure it, bring it back with some realistic funding requirements and some realistic initiatives, and we'd follow through. We're still waiting.
Supplementary.
We're still waiting for an answer to the questions we've been asking. Now, the government has been soft on drunk driving offenders who continue to drive after their license has been suspended for impaired driving. And I'm wondering why, if money is an issue, why the government doesn't do something that doesn't require money and follow the precedent of the government of British Columbia and impose a 7-day jail sentence on those who...
Thank you, Honourable Member. This is supplementaries. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I take issue with the comment that, that we are doing nothing in the area of impaired driving or check stop, or that it relates to dollars. I would ask that the member be in attendance for the estimates of the Solicitor General's Department, which will expand on the budgetary announcement that said there would be major initiatives in impaired driving.
To the Attorney General, the government is also soft on second offenders, and the Attorney General has instructed prosecutors, and it's his a policy to seek a mandatory 14 jail sentence under the criminal code only when the second drunk driving offense has occurred within 2 years of the first. I'm wondering why the Attorney General doesn't follow the precedent of other provinces and take a tougher line and prosecute the second offenses which occur within 5 years as in BC or without
Thank
time
you,
limit.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Paragraph 2. So that's fine. It's taking too long, that's all. The Attorney General, please.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Calgary-Buffalo knows well that what the policy is. We are reviewing those other policies of other provinces, as the Solicitor General has indicated, and as the throne speech indicated. Efforts will be made during the course of this coming year to further step up prosecutions against impaired drivers in an effort to prevent reoccurrences, and also to engage in a very substantial education campaign relative to the dangers inherent in driving while impaired. We are also cooperating with voluntary organizations in Alberta to try and deal with this very serious problem. And it is, of course, something that is not condoned by this government. We are going to do all we can to prevent these repeat offenders, and of course we do require the cooperation of the courts in that regard, but as the Honourable Member is well aware, courts do exercise discretion in making their judgments, and it is not possible, as he well knows as a lawyer, for us to direct a judge as to what the decision will be.
Supplementary, Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Solicitor General whether the designated driver program instituted by the City of Edmonton Police last fall shows a promise of success such that he is prepared to implement it across the province?
Mr. Speaker, I'll take that one on notice. I don't have the information from the Department of the Edmonton City Police, but I will provide it to you.
Calgary-Glenmore supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General, does the Minister plan on reviewing any current legislation dealing with the problem with impaired drivers?
Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in my previous comments to the member...
Time for question period has expired. May we complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned to the member for Calgary-Buffalo, that there's a major thrust in impaired driving and driving initiatives, and the member will wait for the estimates. I will then announce them.
Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly?